Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Hami and these are the headlines. India has reported the highest daily coronavirus cases in the world today, with over 61,500 new infections and 933 deaths. The US has registered more than 58,000 cases and 1,243 deaths in a day. In Brazil, over 50,000 people have tested positive for the virus since yesterday, while 1,079 more died. Here in Pakistan, COVID-19 daily death toll continues to decline, with 14 fatalities, taking the tally to 6,068. The global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 19.2 million, with more than 719,000 deaths. Moody's Investor Service has upgraded Pakistan's outlook from under review for downgrade to stable while maintaining a B3 rating. In its latest report, the International Credit Rating Agency said it expects Pakistan's economic growth to be positive in fiscal year 2021. The report cited the country's improvements in various economic sectors despite the coronavirus pandemic. Malaysia's former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad has slammed India's unilateral abrogation of occupied Kashmir's special status, calling it a siege. Speaking at a Kashmir Solidarity event in Kuala Lumpur organized by the Malaysian Consultative Council of Islamic Organization, Mahathir described New Delhi's actions as an invasion and occupation of the valley, saying India is imposing its will on Kashmiris with impunity. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan thanked the Malaysian leader for supporting Kashmiris and speaking against Indian repression. In South Korea, at least 26 people have died after days of heavy rains battered the southern part of the Korean peninsula. More than 3,000 people have been evacuated, fearing more floods along the Seomjin River. The country's forestry agency has raised landslide warnings to its highest level in the region. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Brazil, over 1,000 people have died in the past 24 hours, raising the country's death toll to nearly 100,000. Mexico has reported nearly 8,000 additional fatalities and over 6,700 new infections in a day. The global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 19 million, with more than 719,000 deaths. More in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic continues to cost thousands of lives daily as many countries seek to lift restrictions. As the U.S. death toll surpassed 160,000, schools have been reopened in several states for in-person classes. Brazilian health officials are overwhelmed by dealing with cases as over 50,000 more people have tested positive, increasing tally to nearly 3 million. Cuba's success story in fighting the coronavirus was short-lived after a spike in fresh cases, causing backtrack on further reopening of the economy.
We have returned to measures in place to reduce community spread in Havana, with all limitations and demands that are applicable to this phase, and as well as the sacrifices that this entails for everyone, for institutions, for the public sector, for the private sector, for our citizens who live here in the capital.
South Korea has reported an increase with 43 new cases in the past 24 hours, up from 20 on the day before. Mainland China has reported 31 fresh cases overnight, down from 37 a day earlier. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam said people should have confidence in the government in these testing times.
This testing team has been here for a few days. I think they are very serious and professional, so I have full confidence in them. I think the citizens in Hong Kong should feel the central government's care for Hong Kong.
Over in Europe, Ireland's Prime Minister Michael Martin has announced a lockdown in 3 counties amid a surge of new cases. In the UK, Preston has become the latest city to face virus lockdowns after a rise in infections. France has reported a record daily cases of over 2,000 since the lockdown was lifted in June.
In Pakistan, 14 more people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, raising the total to 6,068. The Health Ministry says 842 cases were reported overnight as the tally crossed 283,000. The ministry said over 259,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. It said there are now over 17,000 active cases in the country. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 123,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 94,000 cases. Meanwhile, the government has announced these standard operating procedures for the nation's Independence Day and Muharram month. Moody's Investors Service has upgraded Pakistan's outlook from under review for a downgrade to stable while maintaining a B3 rating. In its latest report, the International Credit Rating Agency said it expects Pakistan's economic growth to be positive in fiscal year 2021. The report cited the country's improvements in various economic sectors despite the coronavirus pandemic. The report said the economic growth rate is likely to be around 1 to 2%. The report also hailed a reduction in the current account deficit and flexibility in the exchange rate. Malaysia's former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad has slammed India's unilateral abrogation of occupied Kashmir's special status, calling it a siege. Speaking at a Kashmir Solidarity event in Kuala Lumpur, organized by the Malaysian Consultative Council of Islamic Organization, Mahathir described New Delhi's actions as an invasion and occupation of the valley, saying India is imposing its will on Kashmiris with impunity. He said the BJP government had deployed tens of thousands of troops, arrested political leaders, children, and imposed a communications blackout. Referring to his speech at the UN General Assembly in September last year, Mahathir said he chose to speak out despite being aware of a potential backlash. The veteran leader said he will offer no apology for what he said, and the decreased palm oil export to India was not a high price to pay for calling out injustices. He said keeping quiet was not an option, as the past 1 year proved that his remarks at the UN were rather mild and restrained. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan thanked Mahathir for lending support to the Kashmiris and calling out Indian repression in the valley. Pakistan has told the United Nations Security Council that India is the biggest source of terrorism in the South Asian region. Addressing a UN Security Council session on threats to international peace and security, Pakistan's envoy Munir Akram said Islamabad will continue to expose India. He added that the recent attack on Pakistan Stock Exchange building in Karachi was perpetrated by India-sponsored mercenaries. The envoy went on to say that India's patronage of terrorism has been proved by the arrest of raw-serving terrorist commander Kulbhushan Jadhav. Jadhav has confessed to espionage and terrorism in Pakistan. President of the United Nations General Assembly is due in Pakistan tomorrow to exchange views on priorities of the Assembly's 75th agenda. In a tweet, President Volkan Bozkır said he will meet Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan and Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. Bozkır said the visit comes as the member state Pakistan sent him an invitation. He earlier postponed his visit due to some technical flight problems. Sri Lanka's Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has reciprocated warm wishes to his Pakistani counterpart Imran Khan. In a tweet, Rajapaksa said high-level visits between Sri Lanka and Pakistan will strengthen friendly bilateral ties. Earlier, Prime Minister Imran Khan congratulated Rajapaksa on his party's electoral victory. In a phone call with Sri Lankan Prime Minister, Khan reaffirmed Pakistan's full support to the country in all areas of cooperation. Khan has also extended his invitation to Rajapaksa to visit Pakistan at his earliest convenience. The two countries work closely within the framework of SAARC. Hong Kong has slammed the US sanctions on its chief executive Carrie Lam, saying the curbs are savage and unreasonable. The territory's Commerce Secretary Edward Yao warned of a potential blowback for the US businesses in the financial hub. Meanwhile, Beijing has called the US move clowning actions, saying these threats cannot frighten the Chinese people. In a statement, China's liaison office said intentions of the US politicians to support anti-China chaos in Hong Kong has been revealed. Earlier, Washington said it imposed sanctions on the officials directly responsible for implementing Beijing's policies. The top US counterintelligence official has warned that Russia, China and Iran are trying to interfere in the 2020 presidential election.
National Counterintelligence and Security Center Director William Avernina in a statement said 3 countries are using online disinformation and other means to influence voters and stir up disorder in the country. Avernina said China views US President Donald Trump as unpredictable and will prefer him to lose the election in November. Said Russia was working to malign former Vice President and Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden due to his anti-Moscow stance. The NCSC chief said Iran was influencing the polls under the perception that Trump's re-election will result in continuation of Washington's pressure on Tehran.
I think that the last person Russia wants to see in office is Donald Trump, because nobody's been tougher on Russia than I have ever. Well, I don't care what anybody says. Nobody with any common sense would say, do it. Look at what we've done with our military. Look at what we've done in exposing the pipeline with billions of dollars going to Russia. Look at all of the things we've done with NATO, where I've raised $130 billion a year from countries that were delinquent, and now they're paying all of this money. China would love us to have an election where Donald Trump lost to sleepy Joe Biden. They would dream. They would own our country. If Joe Biden was president, China would own our country.
Meanwhile, in response to the top intelligence head's statement, Trump said the last thing Russia, China and Iran want will be for him to win the election.
In the US Congress, negotiations over another stimulus package for the coronavirus-battered economy have failed. Democrats and Republicans remain at odds over almost all aspects of the bill, including unemployment benefits and cash injections for states. The Republicans want legal protections for employers against virus-related health claims while reducing the $600 a week unemployment benefits. Democrats prefer a bigger package than the one proposed by the Republicans, which is closer to $1 trillion in total. In a news briefing, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said the Democrats were willing to meet the Republicans in the middle.
It was a disappointing meeting. We reiterated in very strong terms our offer. We come down $1 trillion from our top number, which is 3.4. They go up $1 trillion from their top number, which was 1, and that way we could begin to meet in the middle. Unfortunately, they rejected it. They said they couldn't go much above their existing $1 trillion, and that was disappointing.
The United Nations says 9 children have been killed in airstrikes in northern Yemen. In a statement, a UN humanitarian coordinator, Liz Grant, said mostly women and children were hit while traveling by road. Without accusing any warring side, Grant said the attack was shocking and completely unacceptable. But the Houthi rebels claim the government coalition conducted 6 air raids in Jowf province and placed the death toll above 20. Meanwhile, coalition spokesperson says they are looking into the allegations of civilian casualties. So far, more than 100,000 people have been killed in Yemen's conflict, creating the world's worst humanitarian disaster. The United States has imposed sanctions on the leader of a Central African Republic-based militia group, 3R. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the curbs will prevent such actors from benefiting from the U.S. financial system. The U.S. Treasury Department has accused the militia leader, Siddiqui Abbas, of human rights abuse, including torture. In a statement, it said the militia group has killed, tortured, raped or displaced thousands of people since 2015. Earlier, a United Nations Security Committee also imposed sanctions on the militia leader. In Somalia, 8 people have been killed and 14 others injured in a blast at a military base in the capital, Mogadishu. A military official said the attack appeared to be a suicide car bomb explosion. The witnesses said a suicide bomber reportedly drove an explosive-laden vehicle into the military base. They said the blast went off close to a stadium when the explosion was heard. No group has claimed the responsibility so far. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Lebanon's President Michel Aoun has rejected calls for an international probe into the Beirut port explosion. In a statement, the president said a foreign investigation will dilute the truth. He said there is a possibility of external interference through a rocket or bomb or some other act. The statement comes amid increasing demands from the world leaders and the Lebanese nationals abroad for an impartial investigation. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has denied allegations of storing weapons in the port warehouse. The blast on Tuesday killed 157 and injured over 5,000 people. A Pakistan Air Force plane carrying 8 tons of medical and food supplies has arrived in Lebanon. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi telephoned his Lebanese counterpart to express regret over Beirut tragedy. Qureshi assured Chabal Webe of full solidarity and cooperation from Pakistan. He said the Prime Minister and President had already conveyed profound sympathies and condolences to the Lebanese leadership. Russia has asked Twitter to label Western media accounts as state-affiliated outlets. In a tweet, the Foreign Ministry compared Russia's tagged media handle with that of unlabeled German, British and American accounts. It said Russian media outlets are labeled as state-owned, but others are not, even though they are handled by the respective governments. Earlier, Twitter added the new labels to the government officials, including foreign ministers and diplomats. The microblogging giant clarified state-financed media organizations with editorial independence will not be labeled. The Kremlin says President Vladimir Putin has called his Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko to discuss the arrest of 33 Russian nationals. In a statement, it said both the leaders expressed confidence that the situation will be resolved amicably. The Kremlin said Moscow seeks a stable political solution in Minsk and holding the upcoming presidential poll in a calm environment. In a separate statement, the press service of Lukashenko said the detention of the Russian citizens was one of the main topics on the agenda. In late July, 33 Russian nationals allegedly linked to the private military company Wagner were arrested in Belarus. According to Lukashenko, they were going to destabilize the presidential election scheduled for the 9th of August. Russia's Aerial Forest Protection Service says it is tackling around 103 fires raging over an area of 71,000 hectares. The deputy chief of the service said about 66 forest fires covering an area of 720 hectares have been extinguished already. Forest fire services and paratroopers are also working to put out fires in Russia's Yakutia and Kurgan regions. The wildfires have reached into the boreal forest and tundra that blanket northern Russia. The high temperatures in the northern part of the country have fueled massive wildfires and melted permafrost. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban says the illegal migrants pose a biological threat amid the coronavirus pandemic. In an interview, Orban said Hungarians have to think about self-defense even if it angers certain groups. Orban said he has asked the Interior Minister to make sure armed forces and police continue to take action against all attempts at illegal entry. Hungary reinforced borders with troops and police with the support of its partners, Czechia, Poland and Slovakia. A state of emergency has been declared in border regions, along with increased penalties for illegal crossings. Hungary has registered just over 4,600 coronavirus cases and 602 deaths so far. The death toll from an Indian passenger aircraft accident has risen to 20, while 16 people have been severely injured. There were 191 people on board when the plane from Dubai overshot the runway at an airport in the southern state of Kerala due to heavy rain and split into two parts. Aviation officials say the pilot of the flight could not sight the runway in the first landing attempt due to heavy rains. Plane manufacturer Boeing has offered technical assistance to probe the cause behind the accident. An Air India Express statement has said both the pilots were also among those dead. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has expressed grief over the loss of innocent lives in the accident. The death toll from a landslide triggered by heavy rains in southern Kerala state has risen to 23. A local official said 16 people were rescued, but 50 others are still trapped under the debris. Houses in Idukki districts were swept away after torrential rain and flooding hit the area. Local MP Dan Krokose said rescuers have been recovering bodies from the debris. Earlier, India Met Department had issued a red alert for Idukki, forecasting extremely heavy rainfall for over 8 inches. Locals say as many as 20 houses of tea plantation workers and their families were buried under the debris. In South Korea, at least 26 people have died after days of heavy rains battered the southern part of the Korean peninsula. More than 3,000 people have been evacuated, fearing more floods along the Seomjin River. The country's forestry agency has raised landslide warnings to its highest level in the region. A landslide in South Jeolla province has already damaged several houses. This is the country's longest monsoon season in 7 years. Canada's 4,000-year-old mill ice shelf has broken apart due to rising temperatures. Government agency Canadian Ice Service said about 43% of the shelf broke off, with the rupture likely to have happened around July the 30th. The agency said satellite photos show the large ice platform broke apart into 2 giant icebergs and several other smaller ones. It said the shelf located on the northwestern edge of Ellesmere Island was country's last intact ice shelf in its Arctic. Canadian Ice Service said the shelf shrunk by about 80 square kilometers, an area larger than the island of Manhattan in New York. Temperatures in the polar region this year have been severely high as the polar sea ice hit its lowest extent for July in 40 years. Retired Brazilian footballer Ronaldinho and his brother are set to be released after striking a plea deal with the Paraguayan investigators. The duo's lawyer said Paraguay's prosecutor office agreed to suspend the lawsuit pending a final court hearing. The lawyer said the prosecutors recognize the accused did not commit any crime consistent with the defendant's stance. Under the plea bargain, Ronaldinho will pay a $90,000 fine and will report to a federal judge in Brazil every 3 months for 2 years. Meanwhile, Assis will submit $110,000 as fine and will not be allowed to leave Brazil for over a 2-year period. The former footballer and his brother were detained in early March for allegedly entering the South American country with fake passports. In football, Manchester City and Lyon have reached the quarterfinals of the UEFA Champions League. City beat Real Madrid by 2-1 at the Etihad Stadium, while Lyon lost to Juventus by 2-1 but advanced by the virtue of away goals. Already trailing 2-1 from the first leg, Real gifted City a 9th-minute opener after a Rafael Varane error led to a Raheem Sterling goal. The Spaniards head back through Karim Benzema, but Gabriel Jesus pounced upon another Varane mistake in the second to settle the tie 4-2 on aggregate. In Turin, a Cristiano Ronaldo brace for the old lady went in vain as a first-half Memphis Depay penalty proved decisive for the French side. Lyon clung on for a 2-2 aggregate draw as Turin Giants wait for the Champions League lingers, on which they last won in 1996. Lyon will meet Manchester City next week's one-off quarter-final at the Final 8 tournament in Lisbon. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.